Hello, and welcome to our session. I think that our subject today, communications tax, is a bit like jumping onto a moving train. So the growing complexity of communications tax and compliance is moving so fast, and these obligations are broadly expanding across a wide range of industry segments. And to add to that speed of change, these taxes are now being frequently applied to products and services that in no way, shape, or form would traditionally be viewed as telecom products. So just real quickly, let's just talk about what's driving that. It comes down to really three core factors. So the first is convergence. So customers are demanding voice, video, messaging, and email services not as standalone or siloed offerings, but as one unified solution that just works out of the box. And so this is requiring service providers to really broaden what they sell. And as they sell more in different types of services, that increases their tax complexity. The second factor that we'll be talking about a little bit is API-based communication services. So communication services today are increasingly being delivered by API or programmable interfaces. And so we're finding voice, video, messaging is being integrated and available within lots of different SaaS platforms, apps, and connected devices. And when that happens, that transforms these SaaS apps or software products into communication services from a tax perspective. And that creates a lot of complexity in terms of new obligations for a lot of different companies. And the last is just innovation, right? So there's a rapid pace of change in the industry. We've got new services, for example, like streaming that are devouring the old, like pay TV. And tax authorities are scrambling to retrofit old tax rules into new services. And this fit is often complex and can be awkward. So these days, we've got new technology for delivery, we've got the cloud, everything's connected, we've got customer demand for a broader mix of services. And so what follows from there? Well, it's new taxes and compliance obligations, of course. And so today, we're hoping to put a little bit of a real-world perspective on these issues. And so with that, please welcome my guests. Vice President of Tax for Vonage, Rosanne Fernandez, and from AT&T, Assistant Vice President of Tax, Liz Bopp. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Hey, Rosanne.
Hi.
Yeah, so I know that both of you have so much experience and knowledge in this area, and I'm excited about our audience being able to tap into that a little bit. But let's start just by hearing a little bit about you and the companies you work for, kind of how long you've been there, what you love about the industry, just a little bit about your role. So Liz, let's start with you.
Sure. So I've been at AT&T over 25 years now and have been in tax most of that time and have been in every tax function with the exception of federal income tax. I've spent the past, I don't know, time flies, 12 to 15 years in transaction tax, yep. Really focused on making sure that we bill taxes to all of our customers correctly. And what do I love about the industry in AT&T? It's never boring. As you said, Steve, there's so many new products and services. The innovation is just so fast, and trying to take that and bump it against some of the older tax laws and create our tax policy and how we should bill our customers is always a challenge, but it's fun. So I think that's my favorite thing.
Yeah, that's great. There are certainly very few dull moments. And how about you, Rosanne?
So as you said, I'm the VP of Tax at Vonage, and this June I will be celebrating 5 years there. While I'm responsible for all things tax, I spend a lot of my time on the indirect tax space. Specifically in the telecommunication tax space. So I echo what you both said. I absolutely love the fact that the communication industry is constantly evolving, innovating. I feel like I'm always on the cusp of something new, and it's my job to determine how to tax it. So as you both said, never a dull moment, definitely keeps me on my toes and interesting and exciting every day.
That's great. Okay, well, let's get into it. So, I think the first topic I want to dig into is, really about the challenge of expanding communication product portfolios and this kind of blurring of the lines between communications and non-communication services. So Rosanne, let's start with you. So, Vonage is a communications platform provider. You guys deliver a wide range of services, voice, video, messaging. And, the evolution of the company is really fascinating, right? I mean, Vonage started off as this pioneer in the VoIP industry. You kind of fueled your growth through selling, primarily to voice services to consumers. But over time, you've kind of reinvented yourself, and now you're this leading communications platform powering enterprise needs, right? So B2B. Could you just talk a little bit about maybe some of the tax challenges associated with, this transition, right, from selling a single service voice to now selling this full suite of communication services that are this combination of, software and comm services?
Absolutely, absolutely. Happy to do so. So as you said, Vonage started back in the early 2000s, really in the pioneer in the VoIP space, selling to predominantly consumers. In 2013, the company pivoted to the B2B space through a series of strategic acquisitions, as well as organic growth. And as you said earlier, customers today are demanding a one-stop shop for all communication services, UC, CC, API, messaging, video, what have you. And that adds complexity to an already complex tax space. So in my previous life, I used to work for a manufacturer. You would build a product, build it here, ship it to your distribution center, and then ship it to the final consumer, and that's where the tax would reside. Yep. As things become more and more cloud-based, determining the taxation becomes extremely critical, right? Where's the services being performed? And everybody's response is in the cloud. So everybody looks up. I don't see it. So identifying the tax is completely important in this process. And some of the things to consider when you're looking at how to apply taxes to a digital services is, how is the service priced? Is it priced based on usage? Is it priced based on subscriptions? Yep. What is the mix of service being delivered? Is it telecom in nature, or is it a mixture of telecom and something else, a SaaS offering or something else? Is it cloud or SaaS? While they might seem similar, they're not the same. There's very unique differences, and anybody in the state and local tax industry knows that each state and locality has its own definition. So being on top of that's quite critical. And then finally, one of the ultimate most important questions is where's the source of the revenue being taxed? Where's the nexus of that revenue? Yep. And is it based on origination of the traffic? Is it based on termination of the traffic? I mean, these are all really important things to understand as we provide digital services to the community. So it becomes quite important to do so. Yeah,
it's not, there's a lot of nuance, right? And you really have to get into, a lot of the technical details to figure out define what the product is from a tax perspective. It's interesting.
Correct.
So Liz, AT&T is in a unique kind of position in that, I don't know that there's another company that's more synonymous with telecom, right? And, like Vonage, your business has evolved where now you're selling this wide array of services, both communications and not. So, kind of similar question, how has that impacted how you manage tax compliance, really across your business?
That's a really good question, Steve. You're right. I think we are known as, still Ma Bell to certain people, quite frankly. Unfortunately, the taxing jurisdictions think that same thing. So they look at all of our products and services and just automatically assume that all the telecommunications taxes should apply to them. And we know that that's not true. I mean, some of the cloud services don't. Cybersecurity, streaming services, satellite services. So we have a constant battle with the auditors to convince them that we're not just a telecommunications company. Yep. And it's really a difficult challenge to overcome because they come in convinced, without a doubt, that everything we sell has to be a communication service. So and then we had the fine line of we want to balance the right thing for our company and for our customers. So we don't want to apply these pretty onerous communications taxes to non-telecom services, because then we overtax the customer. They're unhappy. Their consultants are unhappy. There's lawsuits.
Yep.
But we also don't want to undertax them, because then we just put that audit risk on the company, which clearly is not good from a financial perspective. So it's a fine line, and it just feels like it's getting worse and worse every day, every month as industry changes.
Yeah. No, and it's an interesting point, right? I mean, just innovation is just outpacing the ability of thousands of jurisdictions being able to keep up with just the evolution of these services. So that was great. I mean, I think that allowed us to just kind of start to scratch the surface of some of the complexity. And so, with our second topic, I think what we wanted to get at is, why is comms tax complex, and how far does that complexity extend? So, as both of you are aware, communications taxes, it's a whole separate set of obligations that sit on top of sales and use tax obligations, and it's very different. But as you know, the complexity, it's not just, it extends well past calculating the tax, right? There are specific requirements around invoice presentment. There are distinct returns that need to be filed. There are distinct exemption management rules. So, Rosanne, if I'm a company and I've just learned that I have a comms tax obligation, how anxious should I be, and what advice would you give someone in that position?
Well, I'm not sure I'd use the word anxious, Steve. I think I'd use the word enthusiastic,
Yes.
perhaps excited about the opportunity.
Yes.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. Comms tax has another layer of complexity in addition to sales tax. So, various states impose their own communication taxes, some side by side with sales taxes, some in addition to sales taxes. And some of those that you'll see are communication service tax, gross receipts tax, utility taxes, occupation taxes. In addition to additional communication taxes, you're also going to see regulatory fees layered into the mix as well. So at the federal level and the state level. So at the federal level, you'll see the Universal Service Fund, which is the big one. That's the program that assists low-income households with communication services. You also see a TRS fee. And then each state has the obligation, if they want to impose their own fees on top of that. They have their own E911 fees, public utility fees. So with all these new taxes and fees, as we know, comes compliance requirements on top of that. So where the average manufacturer may file, 50 to 60 sales tax returns a month, the average telecommunication provider probably files 4,000 or 5,000 returns a month. And then when you're talking about your AT&Ts of the world and Verizon, I mean, I can't even imagine how many returns you guys file a month.
It's about 16, 17,000 a month.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. So it's really important for us to stay on top of these, new taxes, new fees, new legislation. It's absolutely critical. And some of the ways that we can do that is, attending events such as this, networking with our peers, subscribing to your service provider's alerts. And so, I mean, the good news is there's a lot of information out there, and it's there. It's there. Just have to retrieve it. But help is on the way.
Yeah. And so, Liz, what's your take? I mean, I'm sure some of the things that Rosanne just outlined, resonates with you and AT&T's business. So, could you talk a little bit about the complexity that AT&T faces, kind of across the compliance spectrum and all the processes that you support?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Rosanne said. It's crazy. I mean, 16,000 returns, the only way that we can manage it is through automation. And automation is completely key, critical to all of our processes. We have 60 billing systems. I have 30 tax calculation systems that my team manages on a monthly basis. I mean, it's just, without automation, there's no way we would be able to get through it. So we really need a platform, whatever that vendor, third-party vendor or internal platform, that's fast, that's easy to change, that we can manipulate, that we can update, modify, configure. Because with any of the third-party vendors that we use, we may disagree with some of the answers they come out with. So I need to be able to configure that to what my research and planning group wants me to bill. how we do bundles, so how we unbundle. So it's really just key. And a lot of these jurisdictions don't give you much time to do this implementation. So, some states have laws, they have to give you 90 days notice, which sounds like a lot. In some old billing systems, 90 days isn't very much. But a lot of the local jurisdictions, they'll give you like a day's notice, or
Yeah.
the law is retroactive. And they've actually have done retroactive law changes. Kind of hard to build that into a system. So automation is key to us.
Yeah. And one of the things that struck me with both of you is, we talked about this complexity that comes from expanding your products, right? Well, you can build products internally, or you can buy them, right, through M&A. And, with some of the things you talked about, just the sheer complexity of M&A and how that compounds things in terms of having to integrate new teams and new billing systems and different platforms. I think that's something that shouldn't be lost track of either. Yeah. Okay, so if you're tracking in the audience, I'm sure you're feeling that there's a lot of complexity here, right? Maybe more than you originally anticipated. And so I think that brings us to our third topic, which is where we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of international expansion. So, a lot of what we've talked about so far has been centered on communications taxes in the US. However, as communication services are increasingly delivered from the cloud, the upside of that is international expansion becomes less daunting, right? You don't have to build out physical network infrastructure. And so as you expand globally and enter new markets, Liz, could you talk a little bit about some of the specific considerations and challenges there?
Sure. We were always in the international market with our multinational customers, but with our acquisitions of DirecTV and Warner Media, we got thrown headfirst into the international world. So it was quite a learning experience. And and VAT and GST are typically at a country level. But there's other countries that are out there that are almost as bad as the US. So Brazil, India, Canada, they have very complex laws.
Yeah.
So which makes reporting, tax calculations and reporting complex. Then we also have our multinational customers that have a lot of demands from a billing perspective, where they don't want to receive invoices for all 40, 50 countries that they're doing business in, and they're requiring a single invoice that includes all those charges, and they don't want to see tax on it, which is always a challenge. So yeah, it's quite the event.
Yeah. And so you touched on invoicing. So Rosanne, I know Vonage has pursued international expansion pretty aggressively over the past few years, and specifically you're dealing with supporting some of the e-invoicing requirements from various countries. Could you talk a little bit about what that entails?
Sure. Interesting fact, in 2019, the European Commission reported $134 billion loss in VAT fraud and VAT revenue. And most people think that that's related to fraud and tax evasion and things of that nature. However, it's also as easily contributing to miscalculations, administrative errors, and that revenue that the taxing authorities are missing is revenue that helps facilitate different governmental programs such as hospitals and schools and what have you. So it's a pretty big thing going on right now. And so most countries, what they're doing to combat this is mandating e-invoicing. And in a general scenario, a company would prepare an invoice and issue it to the customer. And at some point later, the company would collect those funds from the customer, remit it to the taxing jurisdictions. What e-invoicing is doing is mandating that the entity deliver the invoice to the taxing authority. It runs through their infrastructure, it runs through their system, so that first level of audit is actually already prepared, right? The miscalculations, the administrative errors have already been scrubbed and cleaned, and then the invoices are shipped to the customer. So, that has a lot of benefits. From the customer's perspective, they're getting a clean invoice. From an entity's perspective, it reduces their audit risk because that first level of audit has already been cleaned. we know these taxing authorities have these fantastic algorithms where they do this math, and if you're a percentage point off, that will trigger an audit. So I really think that e-invoicing is going to be the wave of the future, and I think it's something that we all need to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, and and it's interesting. I mean, they're clear. There's obviously work and investment that needs to happen. There are benefits to the taxing authority, but it also sounds a little bit like there's also kind of a win-win for you as a service provider in terms of being able to automate and streamline some of this complexity as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So before we wrap up, to the two of you, are there any issues we didn't talk about or anything that you'd like to mention or advice that you'd like to give some of the companies in our audience?
The one thing I would say, Steve, is that the traditional taxes are declining because more and more of these telecom services are really internet, which isn't taxable anywhere. So my concern is that the jurisdictions are going to come up with a whole new slew of taxes. And maybe they're not going to call them taxes. Maybe they're going to call them right-of-way fees on small cells, or they're going to call them, a 988 tax to support the suicide prevention hotline number, or they're just going to call it something that we're going to have to be aware of and on top of, and make sure that we're working with our tax vendors so that we're all in sync on that, because they just can't support their states or their jurisdictions with the loss of tax revenue.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting. I mean, that's certainly something that we monitor, and that these taxes fund programs. And, to the extent that more services are moving to the internet, you've got to find a way to build that tax base. That's great. And how about you, Rosanne?
I echo everything Liz just said. I think that they will be, if not inventing new taxes and fees, but maybe broadening the definition of what would become taxable or assessable under this new definition. So I echo everything Liz says. And at the same time, my advice is to hang in there and enjoy the ride. I mean, the constant change is what keeps it exciting.
Yes.
And so, it's a great time to be in the communications industry with all this innovation and development. So I just enjoy it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Rosanne and Liz, I think this has been great. I mean, I think you've really helped all of us become, more aware of not only the extent and the pervasiveness of communication taxes, but also touch on, a lot of the complexity and how to prepare for it and how to address some of these challenges. So I just want to thank both of you so much for joining us today. This was great.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.